Abandon all prejudices, all ye who enter here. Park your paradigms, perk up your ears, and open your mind, as we now shine the laser light of reason on the topic of... Shame on you for using the... insert letter of choice, word. Hello, I'm David Bolton, and welcome to part 7 of this series of podcasts dedicated to helping people think more clearly, make sounder judgments, and above all, to unceasingly question instead of naively accepting what others want us to believe. For this is the path of Socrates. Now, today I'm going to talk about a phenomenon that I've noticed that I can't figure out. Maybe you can help me. I will tell you that I left America to go study in Germany at first, and I ended up living there. I was 21 years old after my college years. Just about every year I went back then to America to visit my mother. First my father and mother, but then he died when I was 23. I'd go back every year. One time it was after 2 years that I went back, but normally every year to spend a good part of the summer there. So I've been in touch with America. Now I haven't been there since 2013. I'm horrified at seeing what direction the country has been going in more recent times. But I don't want to talk about that today. I want to talk about a phenomenon that kind of bothers me. When I first went to Europe, I would often hear the criticism of America. It was always that Americans are so childlike and childish. Childlike can be a good thing. Childish maybe not so good. Too emotional. They exaggerate more. In some ways, act like little children. And the truth is, when I would try to defend America when I was younger, and I should say Americans, I have to say they would out-debate me there, because if you look at Germans in general, they're just more serious than Americans. I see so much nonsense and so many ridiculous things. Now, don't get me wrong. So many Americans are serious, good people, and they're not silly whatsoever. But in general, that's the impression Americans make. And I want to give you an example of that, and that's about today. You saw the somewhat strange title of this MP3, Shame on you for using the insert letter of choice, word. Well, last year I read a novel published in 1748 by the Scottish writer Tobias Smollett. I'm sure you all know who he is. Well, he's not so popular anymore, but he really was a great writer, and that was called Roderick Random, his novel. And I like to read 18th century novels sometimes. I don't read much fiction. It's more non-fiction, but every once in a while I like to do that just to get a feel for the times, because I'm a harpsichordist, have a harpsichord channel. Check it out, The Digital Harpsichordist on YouTube. A lot of harpsichord music there, let me tell you. But besides putting in that plug from a harpsichord channel, I mention that because of this novel that I read and explaining why I like to get into 18th century literature. Well, anyway, I noticed something funny in a few parts of that book. It's a book largely about sailors, right? You know how sailors talk. Well, I noticed some things were like, the word wasn't complete. A sailor would say, what the D ... L, in other words, what the devil? Or, what the H ... L are you doing here? I thought, wasn't that funny? Back then, apparently in England, it wasn't politically correct or socially correct to say what the devil or what the hell. Would that it were that these days that were the worst things that people were saying. Because let me tell you, the insults and the terrible things, the words that people hurl around are almost beyond belief. Now let me tell you, I am no prude. My father worked at the waterfront, had so many male family members worked at the waterfront in Baltimore. That's not the most fine and delicate place to be, Baltimore in general, right? I have some friends that used to be in the armed forces, the Navy, for example, and the expression to swear like a sailor, well, there's some truth behind that, right? I have some friends that are constantly swearing, and I don't feel, insulted or, oh my God, what are they saying? I'm no prude in that sense. However, let me tell you what it used to be like. in my family. Like I said, my dad worked at the waterfront, had an uncle who worked at the waterfront, an older cousin of mine worked at the waterfront. But we go visit that side of our family. Okay, there are a few guys there working in the waterfront, right? And I can't imagine that their language is always prim and proper when they're amongst their buddies in the waterfront. But in the family there, we had a family reunion, you didn't, throw around the most obscene remarks. You just didn't do that because there were also women there, there were children there. And it just wasn't done, besides which it was a Catholic family and the religious element as well. I'd like to know this. Somebody explain this to me. There's some words that you're never supposed to use. I mean, really, use one of those words in no matter what context, even if it's, just a linguistic context, explaining words in the language. You use certain words, and the people would jump on you like you're some kind of a monster. Most specifically, the N-word, of course. You've already had that in your mind. The N-word. Well, we don't talk about... Also, though, you might read about the F-word. You read something written in a context where, people want to respect the feelings of others. So they say, oh, yes, there's a lot of usage of the F-word or the MF word. You know what this reminds me of? It's kind of like little children. The type of children that have been totally indoctrinated and well-trained, so they're like little Lord Fauntleroy. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Fauntleroy, I suppose, is really a movie back in the 1930s, before my time and yours, almost certainly. But he was so prim and proper and so obedient and so good. And it's kind of like a lot of Americans are like little 6-year-old children, where their mothers teach them, now don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, don't say this, don't say that. And so the little boy and girl say, okay, mommy. But then, for example, the girl does something, and the little boy, mommy, she said that word you're not supposed to say. She said that F word. And then the mother gets mad at the kid. Okay, little kids that have been maybe even well-trained to avoid certain words, I can understand that. But when we're still as adults at that level, that we have to say, oh, he used the F word, he used the N word, doesn't that seem a bit childish to you? Really? Doesn't seem bad that even I, and I'm rather outspoken, anybody that knows me will tell you that, even I, to use a certain, like the N word, among friends, when we're talking about linguistic things, or, and I'll tell you a story in that regard. This points out how ridiculous some things are. Now, don't get me wrong. In my family, we didn't use the N-word because we think it's a terrible thing to insult people because of their race, and period. That's all we needed. We didn't need some watchmen, watchwomen of social justice and political correctness to tell us, oh, don't use this word. We didn't need that. My father was a decent person. My mother was a decent person. We lived in a largely black neighborhood, and I had black friends, and they were good people, and their families were good people. And the idea of insulting people because of their race, in my family, we just didn't do that. Nonetheless, were we capable of saying that word? Well, in my family, not my parents really, no. They didn't use that word. With me and my friends, even my black friends, you sometimes hear them saying that. I wouldn't call them, I didn't want to insult them, but we could at least pronounce the word. We could say, for example, people shouldn't call each other niggers because you shouldn't do that, right? And look, I actually said that word. But let me tell you, upon saying that word, immediately, even I was thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't say this. My God, let's grow up. It's a word. And the F word is a word. And these are words that I don't think should be used. I'll tell you. Okay, to my Navy friends who listen to this, I don't feel insulted. Not putting it down. I know these are habits. These are habits that I think maybe shouldn't be formed. Look at the MF word, and you all know what I mean. Personally, for example, if I were black, I'd rather have somebody call me the N word than the MF word. Because if you use the MF word, if you're using an N word, okay, then I know this person is most likely a racist, I think we can say, and they just hate everybody of my color. But to use the MF word, that's a personal insult. And it's insulting my mother, too, who might be the greatest person in the world. Okay, maybe I did something bad and they're insulting me. But why insult my mother? But of course, as Voltaire said, the masses never think, they only feel. It's like Voltaire, the great French philosopher, compared the masses to a big wild animal. He said the mass is like a big wild animal, it never thinks, it only feels. So what happens then? Then we're conditioned. Don't say this, don't say that. Oh, but you must say this. If somebody now says all lives matter, oh, don't say that. You must say, repeat after me, Black Lives Matter. My God, how stupid are people that they can fall for that? Somebody says Black Lives Matter, I'll say, well, tell me something else new, right? I mean, of course Black Lives Matter. Of course white lives matter. Of course all lives matter. Okay, let's put it aside, because unless you're a maniac or a fool, of course or an evil person, of course all lives matter. But if you say all lives matter, and Pete Buttigieg, in that way, Buttigieg, how do you pronounce his name? I'm not sure. I certainly can't tell just by reading it. He said last year, all lives matter. Months later, he apologized. I'm sorry for saying that, because of course he's to the left, and they criticize him. No, you have to say Black Lives Matter. What the D.L is the matter with these people? Seriously. And you might think, oh, David here is going overboard. He shouldn't be saying these things. But I know that most of you, because most of people, I don't care whether you're black, white, Inuit, that's Eskimo for those old timers like me, Japanese, Chinese, I don't care what you are. Most of you people out there are good, decent people. If most of us were evil, bad people, the human race would have killed itself. We would have died out thousands of years ago. And in my experience, most people, I don't care what country you're from, most are good, decent people. I'll even say this. Even people who live in the Soviet Union, I didn't travel. I did go to East Germany a couple of occasions back when it existed. I think most people in the Soviet Union were good, decent people that couldn't speak out and say what they think. And let me tell you, I think even there's some people in the Communist Party that were good, decent people, but they'd just been indoctrinated. And they weren't the ones who were murdering others, but they did toe the party line because they'd learned that. And we've all become so indoctrinated in so many stupid ways that it's time more people just stand up and say this. Once again, I'm not advocating using slur words to insult people of a certain race. But on the other hand, you think of something common like F you. Okay, you get in a debate about somebody, and you bring up a point, and they don't know how to respond, so they just say F you. I mean, that is so stupid. Let's say it's just so stupid. If you have a good argument for something somebody else says, then bring out that argument. Have a good, healthy debate. If you don't have any argument because you've reached the end of the line, and it could just be that maybe that person is right, don't say F you, say thank you. Say thank you, and I've done that before. I might have been arguing something, and somebody brings up a better argument than I have. I say, well, thanks for that, because I didn't think of that. Don't say F you, say thank you. But if you have to resort to simply insulting people and using words like the F word or the MF word or the N word or the WS word, I hope we get to the point where we say, oh, you said that WS word, namely white supremacist word, right? The term. What's that you said? You say all lives matter. You're a white supremacist. You have to say Black Lives Matter. Well, no, damn it, or should I say it? I'm not going to say that. All whites are not white supremacists. If you say that, you're either a liar or a fool or a fanatic, period. Let it be said. Sing it to the mountaintops. Let the sound ring out. All whites are not white supremacists and evil, and they don't hate blacks. I never hated blacks as a kid. I can tell you about times when I lost white friends because a new black kid moved in the neighborhood. I thought, oh, let him play baseball with us. And that way I lost two of my best friends because they did use the N-word. They didn't like blacks. I thought, well, the hell with you. Oh, I'm sorry, the H ... with you. because look, the black kid was a nice kid. I saw it. And he became a friend of mine. And if I lose white friends because of it, so be it. And it could go the other way around too. I don't know. Why can't we all just be human and look at people for what they are inside? I mean, isn't that what Martin Luther King said? Yes. I know I'm getting maybe a bit too humorous here, or it might seem a bit too emotional, but sometimes I look and see the way some people are so foolish, so childish, and then even worse, the way the masses are too scared to speak up and just say, oh, well, better not say this, I better say this. I would say you shouldn't use the N-word, of course not. And even If a black person insults you, offends you, attacks you, don't use the N word and don't use the F word. If somebody attacks you, if they attack you with words, well, you can insult them if you want, or just do whatever. If they attack you with physical violence, then I hope you're trained enough to respond with the necessary force to put that person down, and I don't care what race they belong to. And if you think that sounds a bit too harsh, well, remember, all the males in my family came from Baltimore waterfront. I'm sorry, and I'm a child of Baltimore. But if somebody attacks me physically, I'm going to respond in kind if necessary. And that's the way it should be, really. In self-defense, well, it's a right. I won't get into the Second Amendment. You can imagine what my views are there, though. Everybody has a right to defend themselves. I shudder to think if the Second Amendment is done away with, people think, oh, that's a white thing, white supremacist thing. I guarantee you, in the black ghetto areas, there's some good, decent people who do have a gun there because they know the neighborhood they live in, and they're good, decent people. But they know that some night they might hear some thugs, breaking in through the front window, and their life might be on the line. And those people also have a right to defend themselves. I mean, the good, decent people that might be gun owners, and they know why they have a gun, to defend themselves, not to go rob a liquor store or something. So, getting back to these words now, do we really want to be at the level, well, you can't say this, you can't say that? I say we should avoid certain words simply to not offend people. If I'm with my, say, ex-Navy friends, and they talk in such a way, I don't feel offended by it at all. On the other hand, when I hear people these days, and it's so frequent, they could be in a mixed group of people, maybe people they just met, and yet it's, F this, the F in this, the F in that. Haven't they considered that some of the people in that group that they just met might be religious people that don't like that kind of talk? They might not want their children to hear it, and they might not want to hear it. This is what I don't get, and I'll ask you people that are more the political left. Why are you dictating to maybe the political right the things they can and can't say, but then you feel free to say whatever you want? In other words, say you're somebody, and let's exaggerate here, let's say it's somebody, a clanner, I don't know, some real racist that uses the N-word. You say, you can't use that, that's bad, but then you say F and this and that. Well, you're offending people too. Say the religious people, say more fundamentalists. Don't you consider that? Why is it people think free speech, well, that's for me, but it's not for the others? I think it was Churchill who said that we have to recognize, when we talk about free speech, it's not mainly about protecting what I say. Everybody thinks, I should have the right to say this. No, free speech is about protecting what other people, what contrarians want to say. That's what real free speech is. I know maybe many of you in America don't realize what free speech is because it's becoming largely lost in the past year. I say it jokingly, a year isn't that much time. But just give it time. If it goes on like this, free speech will be lost. And I mean practically totally. Consider that. Consider what that means. We should have free speech. We should have a right to express our opinions. However, our expressions should be modified, and they should be modified by respect towards others. Hey, if I meet somebody who's even ranting and raving, spewing out all kinds of words, whether it's N-word, F-word, MF word, I don't care what, my first attempt to communicate with the person is going to be calmly and say, okay, well, what is it you're complaining about? Let's talk about this reasonably. And if they calm down, then I'm not going to criticize them for the words they use. I'm going to try to calm them down and find some common ground for further conversation and for maybe solving problems that might well exist. I know that that a lot of people are maybe much more in the emotional level than others are and than I am. If you've listened to my other MP3s, or if you know me, yes, I have emotion, and I think some things should be put across with emotion. I don't think that your first resort should be to that of disrespect towards other people, of insulting people, and dividing people, black, white, left, right, good ones, bad ones, etc., whatever you see, Christians, non-Christians, Christians, Jews, atheists, theists, always accenting the differences. Muslims, Christians, my God, how many polarities can I come up with here? Probably a never-ending stream, because that's what human beings unfortunately do. Human beings tend to think either or. Either you're one of us, or you're one of them. Now, to me, that seems quite childish, but I understand it has evolutionary grounds. It was necessary for survival, even if you go back only a few hundred years. And, considering the age of humankind, a few hundred years is really just a drop in the bucket. But you just go back 500 years, if you're living in a peaceful little village, and there were peaceful little villages even 500 years ago. There were villages that were practically never touched by war or whatever, or big disasters. But if you lived in a peaceful village and suddenly you saw on the horizon, a few hundred people coming that weren't like you, you better call out the guards. Because why were they coming here? Different possibilities. Maybe these people were coming because wherever they were, there was no more game or the crops were failing and they wanted to take yours. Or maybe they were escaping from a city where the plague had broken out and these people were escaping from that, but half of them were carrying the plague. You don't want those people to come into your town, do you now? Because then you're going to get the plague and half of your population is going to die off. You think COVID is bad. Look at the absolute death numbers for COVID compared to the total population. I say this again and again, but apparently people don't like to calculate. Some say that math is racist. I won't give you my opinion on that because it's so stupid that it requires that no opinion be given. I assume if you're a thinking person, if you're listening to me up to this point, you are a thinking person. If you're a thinking person, you know that statement like math is racist is so stupid that it's not even worth a comment, period. But the number of people that died of COVID compared to the total population, you make a comparison to the plague years. The bubonic plague that broke out again and again. There's this huge outbreak in the 1360s, I believe it was. And it killed like 40% of Europe. I mean, you talk about the 0. whatever percent being killed by COVID. I think that's bad. If that were the case, if the bubonic plague comes back and kills almost, in some places it killed half the people, well then even I would want a vaccine passport. But, do a little bit of math and see how big the danger really is there. Listen to some of my other talks on this topic that touches the topic of COVID. I think I must have something up by now there. And about plans to possibly depopulate the world. Sound like a crazy conspiracy theory? Listen to what I say, and that one, I think that's my MP3 number 3. I don't have the screen up at the moment. You can look for it, and then you might think again. Getting back to these words we use, let's take the right, for example. Because there's enough criticism to go around to all sides. How many times have I heard people, and good people on the right, because there are good people on both sides, of course. There are fanatics, of course, on both sides as well. But some may seem to have the view that they're always stressing God, Christianity, Jesus Christ. Fine. But by stressing that so much, you're also alienating some people. Now, you might believe that, of course, your religion is correct. I defy you to show me anybody with any religion that thinks his religion is correct because they're all right. Let me give you a lesson to you people, left, right, whatever. A lesson my father taught me. Now, my father was not he was not a word cleaver. Remember, leave it to Beaver. Okay, Wally, let's sit down at the table and talk about this. He wasn't like that. He wasn't a preacher in that sense. Boy, did the apple fall far from the tree in my case, because one of the critiques of one of my books, I think I remember, a rational, what's it called? Wait, let me look that up. I've written so many books, I have to remember the exact title of this one. I haven't looked at it in a while. Yes, the book that I'm referring to is called, and I guess that's a good sign. I've written so many books that I occasionally forget the title, but some of my titles are a bit long. It's called God, UFOs, and the Death of JFK, An Alien Perspective on Belief and Reason, or Why Reptilians Are a Lot Smarter Than Us. That's, of course, a bit of comedy there. It's a book that analyzes precisely this, one side, the other, political left, political right. I wrote it 10 years ago, so a lot of the more relevant themes of today are not in that. Nonetheless, I think it's well worth reading. Amazon.com, look it up, God, UFOs, and the Death of JFK, An Alien Perspective on Belief and Reason, or Why Reptilians Are a Lot Smarter Than Us, by David Bolton. And I mention it because one of the critiques it got Amazon, it gets generally good marks. What did it get here? I think only 5 reviews till now and 3.5 stars or something. And one person says, well, it's something like, it's a good book, but it's a bit preachy. I burst out laughing because I thought, my God, the whole thing's one long sermon. very comical. I think it's not really a sermon in the church sense, but I want to get some points across, just like I'm doing these MP3s. And so I have something to preach in me. My dad didn't really have that, but he taught me some lessons without even putting it so much into a lot of words. And one of those was this one. I remember one time, I think some religious group, I don't know who they were, came to the door looking for donations or something, and my father, who was a Catholic, immediately gave him a few dollars. Not that he was the type, the sucker born every minute would, be cowed into giving money, not at all. But I gave him a couple of dollars, said, well, Dad, a few months ago, some other group came, gave him some money. He said, yeah. I said, well, look, let's talk about this. I don't know how it was, 10, 11. I was kind of philosophically inclined even as a kid. I said, look, Dad, we're Catholic, right? But back then, I was a believing Catholic. He seemed to be too, I'm not sure. But my mother was very Catholic. I think if he differed from Catholic doctrine, he wouldn't say it at home because he respected my mother, right? Maybe some others of you were in that situation. But I still believed. I was, 10 or 11, like I said. And I said, look, Dad, let's look at it rationally here. We're Catholic, so we believe Catholicism is right? I said, so if one religion is right, the others can't be right, or they can't be all right. If Catholics are right in following the Pope, then Protestants can't be right not following the Pope. And I said, if Catholics are right in this, or Protestants are right in one thing, then Muslims can't be right, or Jews can't be right, or whatever. And my father said to me something I'll never forget. He said, no, you're wrong. They're all right. I said, what? That doesn't make any sense. They can't all be right. One says that, there's Holy Communion, and it's really the body of Christ. And others say, well, it's just a symbol. And others say this. And he said, no, they're all right. And he just smiled. He wouldn't give me an explanation. And let me tell you, it took me years to figure that out. Many years, because I thought, well, he just didn't want to get into a debate with me. But my father was quite intelligent. And he didn't shy away from good debate. And for years I thought, why would he say such a thing? Finally, after maybe a few decades, it finally dawned on me what he meant by that, what he was trying to say. And I'm reaching this conclusion not only in what he said, what I'm telling you, but also on everything else I remember about my father, about how he was accepting with people, unless they crossed him, unless they didn't deserve. Oh boy, he was a fighter, let me tell you, ex-Marine. But his first impulse was to always treat people with kindness and respect. It doesn't matter who it was. Could have been a bum from the street. And still, he might give him a couple of dollars and get something to eat or whatever, but he'd always listen to the person, always treat people with kindness and respect. Unless they disrespected him or, got really brazen, oh my God, there could be some really bad scenes there. And that was also, I guess, teaching by example, you could say. But with the religion thing, that all religions are correct, I'm convinced that what he meant was this. If your religion makes you a better person, then stick with it. Because your religion is then right for you. I think you get the point there. I don't care what religion you belong to. And I'll go further than that. I'll say if you were religious and you become an atheist, but you notice, and your friends say too, since you've been an atheist, you've been a much better person, a kinder person, a more inclusive person, a better person in general, an improved person. If becoming an atheist makes you a better human being, then by God, you should remain an atheist. I would go that far. My father didn't say that, but I will go that far. If you were before that a Christian, maybe one of the very fanatical variety, and you weren't so accepting of people, but now you've become an atheist and you're a much better person and you should be an atheist. I will say this, atheism taken to its logical conclusion, does not make for a better person. I'll be talking about that in some other MP3. Not that atheists are always bad people. I know atheists are very fine, very good people. And atheism, for some people, it might make them better people. But atheism of its own, when carried to a logical conclusion, does not make for better people. And I'll present you with those ideas at a future time. Just give me a second. I needed to put on pause for a second to write down precisely the idea to not forget to make that MP3, that podcast. Let's go back now to the words, the D word. That's devil. The H word, that's hell. Ah, no, wait, I'm in the 21st century, now I can say those words, right? But other words, depending on where it is, well, it's the F word. Why don't we just, here's a good suggestion for everybody, as I suggested before, why don't we just get over using those words? Let's take the F word now. Does that really enrich your language? I believe the direction it's going. Have you ever done this experiment? Have you ever looked at, say, a typical text written, say, in the 18th century and in the 21st century? In general, what you will find is that the level of language is much higher back then. I'm convinced sometimes that maybe within 100 years, when you see a typical text, you're going to see things like this. The F and MF went to the F and F and F, and then the MF. In other words, we're going to replace all the words with F and MF. Do you ever notice that? I've known people that can't say a single sentence without throwing in effing or F in some form 3 times in the same sentence. Is this improving us? I mean, really, is this helping us? Is this improving us? What does that add to the language? It's like we're a bunch of morons. I mean, let's face it. As I've long said, the first person in history, I don't know who it was, I think nobody does, to say F you was probably a revolutionary genius. Why? Because he was in some situation where somebody was being so unreasonable, being so impossible, that he said something for the first time in history. Imagine, the first person in history saying F you, and probably everybody around him was shocked. They couldn't imagine that. They were just absolutely shocked. And then probably they all took out their swords and hacked him into pieces. I don't know how that ended. This is just my imagination, my speculation. But you see what I mean. When you're the first one to say F you, I'm sure he got the point across. But when you're the 2 billionth saying it for the 10 trillionth time, you're just foul-mouthed. You're not a genius. You're not expressing yourself well. You're not adding more nuances to what you're saying. You're not helping people understand you. You're just foul-mouthed and saying something because you're used to saying. You've just acquired a bad habit, and that's it. You do understand my point, and I'm sorry to my ex-Navy friends. I'm sorry. And, when you talk with me, you can talk however you want. You're not going to offend me. But I think you're intelligent enough to see your point. You're my friends. I know you're intelligent enough to see my point. If it's a habit you've acquired that you can't get rid of, just keep in mind, you could alienate some people. You're not alienating me, you're my friends. But you should think about this. And on a different level, I think it's good to have more wealth in your vocabulary. I read a study years ago, some psychological study. I can't quote who did it because I read it decades ago. But it said that they've discovered that children who are taught more vocabulary generally have higher IQs. And the hypothesis was that maybe because they learned to differentiate things more, because they learn many more adjectives, many more nouns, and they distinguish things more, therefore they develop intelligence more. Well, on the other side of the coin, suppose the parents are always just swearing, F and this, F and that. That's not improving a child's vocabulary. That's making them dumber, actually. That's food for thought, at least. Whether that hypothesis is correct, I don't know. I guess it should be tested more. But it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It kind of makes sense that if you learn to use a wider variety of words, you're going to think in a more nuanced manner, and you're going to develop your mind more. Why then, I ask you, why then are so many people, instead of trying to learn more vocabulary, they're lowering the vocabulary, imitating the classes that use the most F words and N words and all these things? Well, N-word, that's pretty much out, right? Except for the extremists. I think really not many people use that word anymore. And I know because I know back when I was a kid, say in the 60s, a lot more people use it than they do now. And yes, I criticized it then too, but nonetheless. And yet the omnipresence of the F word or some variation thereof, and I don't consider that decent language. I don't consider it language that contributes more to understanding or to distinguishing things more or to expressing your ideas better. It's simply an unfortunate habit that people have acquired, and maybe it's time to get over that. Just a suggestion, people. I mean, maybe you're so used to it. Maybe you like it. Maybe you think it adds more color to language. This gets to another topic. Remember, my talks have a tinge of stream of consciousness about them. Don't expect me to stick to just one subject the whole time, because everything in life is connected somehow. But why the D dot 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 L, or why the H dot dot, or why the F, whatever you prefer, do we humans even have the necessity of using extreme language? Did you ever think about that? You ever think about that? And I think that topic is big enough that I'm going to add that to my list. I'll add it here. Why have my file here, my Excel file? Well, actually, it's LibreOffice. I say LibreOffice. It's a totally free program. It has like the spreadsheet and the text, and it's totally free. You don't have to pay for Microsoft Office or download illegal copies, whatever. Totally free. I think it's maybe even open source. I'm not sure. No, the company doesn't pay me money to say that. I'm just giving you a helpful suggestion here. Why do humans like bad language, or like swearing, put it like that? Obviously, this is not a thing of the intellect, is it now? Remember Mr. Spock on Star Trek? I wasn't a huge Star Trek fan, but yeah, I watched the show a lot. Can you imagine him saying, "What the devil?" Okay, maybe Scotty would, right, or whatever, or what was his name? Dr. McCoy, right? He'd say, "What the devil?" Da, da, da. But of course, what the F they couldn't say on TV back then, and still can't on network TV. By the way, remember when the word bitch became acceptable on TV? I think it was about 1990. I had a rather privileged perspective because from the 1976, the end, I lived in Europe. And like I said before, every year I come back to America. And so I noticed the changes. People that you Americans maybe didn't notice too much. And I'm making MP3s not just for Americans, but for the entire world, of course. Anybody who speaks English can listen to me and hopefully get something out of it. But I'm addressing myself now to Americans in particular. Sometimes I noticed things my friends in America didn't notice because it went more gradually for them. They were there constantly, but I just come back once a year. One time, like I said, it was 2 years. And then I thought, wow, this has changed. Well, one time I came back and suddenly on TV, everyone was saying bitch, son of a bitch, son of a bitch, son of a bitch. Sorry, my religious friends that don't like people to hear that word, or if children are hearing it. Children, this is something you really shouldn't say. Because once again, this one insults son of a B dot dot dot. Son of a, well, they don't mean female dog, of course. But by calling somebody that, you're insulting their mother, really. Right? And by insulting the person might have done something bad against you, but still that person can't help whose son they are. So it's a stupid insult. It's a stupid insult. And before on TV, you couldn't say that. They would say, for example, son of a, and then somebody would cut them off because you weren't allowed to say the word bitch on TV, right? But suddenly I noticed, and somebody told me when it was, I don't remember, not going to bother to look it up. I think it was around 1990. I came home and suddenly I thought, my God, on every TV show, they're saying son of a bitch. It's kind of like children once again. It's kind of like children say in a Catholic school. Like if you dared say, well, I mean, some of the things kids say in school today. Let me tell you, I went to a Catholic school, Blessed Sacrament School in Baltimore, Maryland, and there were nuns there. I hear stories now, I heard from some Spanish woman, friend of mine, who went about, I think 15 years ago, 20 years ago maybe, out to California to teach. The language those kids were using to her, I mean, F this, MF, to their teacher. Let me tell you, if I had said such terms to one of those nuns, and some of those nuns, my God, they were mean. Some were very nice people. And I respect them all because they put up with us and taught us some good things in life. And the educational standards were higher then than they are now, let me tell you. So yes, thank you all. I think they're all dead by now anyway. But nonetheless, some were pretty mean. You didn't dare do anything. And if you had dared say, F you, sister. Oh, if I had said that, I wouldn't be making this with you because I would have died in 1965 or whenever, 1962. I entered school 61. Let me tell you. But these days, what kids even say to teachers, and they can't do anything about it. Is that a good thing? Well, besides which, then in the case of the Spanish friend of mine, she made the kids stay after school. The parents complained. And they were insulting the teacher too. Back in my day, if I had done something really to cross a nun, said even just, sister, you're dumb, or something like that, I mean, oh my God, that would have been bad enough. If I then went home and told my parents that she made me stay after school, why would you do? Well, for example, if I said, F you, sister, then if the sister hadn't killed me, my parents would have. Well, not really, but you know what I mean. They wouldn't have called the sister complaining, why did you keep my son after school just because he said that? But that's the level we've sunk to in America in a lot of parts. This is food for thought. But in general, I don't think we should be teaching our children, well, of course, parents don't teach children, hey, look, kid, say this. Although, what am I saying? I saw months ago a photo of people protesting out in the street, and these, I think they're Antifa or BLM people. I don't know what they are or what they were exactly, but they gave a little girl, I think it was a black family, I believe. I'm not sure though. Doesn't matter really. This sign, I think was saying, I believe it said, F you police or something like that. In other words, these parents were teaching the kids to use this language when they're like 6, 7 years old. It's bad enough the kids learn by bad example. But when you're actually actively teaching your children to talk like that, you expect your children to turn out better? Do you expect them to turn out more understanding, reasonable, more willing to compromise, more kind, more decent, more respect? You really expect that? What the devil are you doing? Oh, I'm sorry, what the D ... are you doing? Now, I do understand that when people get emotional, they want to use this sort of language. Like I said, I'll do a special MP3 on this, looking at it from the alien perspective. Because sometimes I think, I don't know about you, dear listeners, sometimes I think I'm an alien. Because I look at humanity, and I look at the fact that apparently they don't learn from history. A lot of them don't even read history. They don't learn from example of others. You know, a wise person can learn. They don't have to make mistakes. They learn from the examples of others. Even fools in most cases can learn at least from their own mistakes. But we have fools that are in such a level today that they make the same mistakes again and again, and they still don't learn. What is going on here? And sometimes I think, well, maybe my soul in a past life, maybe it comes from another planet or something. Because I just don't understand what's going on. Is so much of humanity so much on a negative emotional level that they just can't control their impulses, that they can't do this, that the first impulse is to attack others, to separate us, always creating these polarities, as I said before, you know, Christian, Jew, theist, non-theist, black and white. Haven't people realized that it should be about being inclusive? And here's criticism of the right. Instead of talking so much about Jesus and his message, which was a great message, I'm not disputing that. But you know, that could put off some Jewish people that don't accept Jesus Messiah. It could put off a lot of atheists that on other issues might be totally in agreement with you. In other words, some people, right wing, right and left, I'm going to give a talk about that because these terms are no longer valid. For any true thinker, we have to realize that the terms right and left really shouldn't apply anymore. We should think of other terms for that, and I have some suggestions to make in the future. We're using terms that were relevant, at least seemingly, decades ago, and we're using them as if they were still totally valid, and they are not. I'll say that much. But isn't it time for us to become maybe less negatively emotional, to always give others, at least at first, benefit of the doubt, to listen to what the others are saying, no matter what they're saying? Hey, if somebody comes along and says, Black Lives Matter and white police are killing blacks all over the country. I heard one young black woman saying that when some reporter asked, yes, all over the country, thousands of blacks are being murdered by police. Well, you know, actually, unarmed blacks shot by police in, I think, 2019, it was like 2 or 3, not thousands. But listen to what the people say. This young woman, I'm not saying the young woman's evil. This is a mistake too. The people on the other side are always evil, right? For the left, the Trump supporters, they all attacked the Capitol. Forget the fact that there was Antifa there without a doubt, but the left doesn't want to see that. Those Trump people are evil. And what do Trump people do? The people on the left, they're evil. They don't accept Jesus Christ. We know a lot of atheists don't, a lot of Jews don't, and a lot of them are good people. A lot of people on both sides have just been hypnotized. My view, most of humanity is living in a state of hypnosis. I'm going to explain that, what I mean by that exactly, in another MP3. It will become crystal clear to you then. I won't go into that now. Just keep following these podcasts and you'll see when that theme comes up. I think it's time that we listen to the other side. One time, I'll tell you that's worth an MP3 too. I was flying in a plane. This was 1975, and I met one of the, I guess you could say, bigwigs in the International Neo-Nazi Party. No, I don't mean skinheads that are out there raising a ruckus. No, these were very fine-looking gentlemen, but one of the more or less intellectual forces behind the International Neo-Nazi Party, the connections this guy had. And I talked to him for hours. That's a really interesting story. Was he turning me into a Nazi? I was only 19. Of course he wasn't. Really interesting twist there at the end. Yeah. Anyway, my first impulse is listen to anybody. I used to talk to communists when I lived in Germany. And I debate with all these people. First listen to what they say, and then take it apart. Then take it apart and then show them how what they say makes no sense. Of course, you have to have the maybe ability for that. I admit I was always good at debate. And I mean really good. No brag, just fact, as Will Sonnet would have said. And so I was, so I could debate with this older guy who was very intelligent and a Nazi, but I could debate him. There was no way he could win, because I'd read history as well, and I knew certain things about people at the age of 19. I know not everybody can do that. But in general, listen to what they say, and then think about it, and then show them why it's wrong. What's the matter with that? What's the matter with that? When it gets to the point, however, when, say, some blacks say, yes, police are treating us unfairly, and say, no, that never happens. Well, of course that happens sometimes. Let me tell you something about police. I like to look at numbers, because numbers are important. How many law enforcement people are there in the U.S.? Well, I looked that up. There are about 800,000. Now, let me ask you this question. When in the history of the world has there ever been a group of 800,000 people, imagine a city larger than Baltimore, 800,000 people where everybody was good? Do you think that's ever occurred in the history of humanity? I can tell you the answer. No, it hasn't. Whenever you have 800,000 people, they might be mostly good, because most people in every group are mostly good, as I said before. But if you have 800,000 people, you're going to have some bad apples. And we have 800,000 people that every day are dealing with lowlifes of one color or another, because, let's face it, police officers, can you imagine what they face? And what you see on TV is only what you can see on TV. I read a book about a year ago about policemen and their everyday, what things they experience. I read one story I'll never forget. What was this story? Police officer called to the scene of an accident. There's an accident on a highway, right? And police have to go, and the ambulances, of course, too. Well, get this. Police officers go to the scene. This terrible accident, a bunch of people there, and dead people. The driver of this one car, the father of a family, was decapitated, first of all. First, they have to see that. Then there was a child in the car that was alive. I don't think that child was all that, maybe, 8 years old, whatever. The police are in shock, of course. But then the kid says, where's my baby brother? And the officer notices with horror a baby seat in the back, but there's no baby there. They look around for the baby. They couldn't find it anywhere. And then one officer looks up, off the side of the road in a tree. The body of the baby had been hurled from the car and had been impaled by a branch of the tree. They had to get a ladder, climb up there, and pull this poor little dead creature off the branch of the tree. You don't even see that on cop shows on TV, do you know? Because it's so horrifying. But let me tell you, we have 800,000 police officers in America. And of course, most of them are good, and they became officers to serve their community. And now we're seeing the phenomenon that certain groups are saying, oh, the white ones, at least, they're all racist. They just want to kill blacks. This is so disgusting that people say that why everybody doesn't rise up and I don't care what your whether Democrat, Republican, whatever, rise up and say, this is atrocious. Yes, they're bad cops. When there are, they should be put on trial. Of course, every sane person agrees to that. But if you consider that there are 800 police officers and sometimes they have to go through scenes like that, can you imagine what that would do to your mind? Okay, that was an accident. But now imagine police officers, they go into a house. Once again at that address, there's domestic strife. You go in, the woman's totally beat up and she's missing 2 more teeth. But she says, oh no, I just fell and, tripped and fell down the steps, because she knows she says something else. The husband's going to then kill her when he gets out, if he ever does go to jail in the first place. Meanwhile, maybe there's a baby there whose diapers haven't been changed for 2 days because both the parents are drug addicts. Can you imagine how many police officers are so sickened by what they see? Do you think that does nothing to their minds? What would it do to you? This is one reason. When I was young, I thought, well, I'll become a police officer. I even thought at one point, maybe go in the military, see the world, that sort of thing. I would have been a better soldier than a police officer, let me tell you. Because I think I might have reached the point. If I see, you see these criminals, they do this, they do this. At some point, I don't care what color they are, at some point, if I see one that's obviously guilty, and he's just done this or that, but there's not enough evidence, I might just take out my gun and shoot him in the head. I know it sounds terrible, but this is all about honesty as well. I probably wouldn't. But what I'm saying is, I think that some of these officers, when they see things again and again, some of them just go bad because it's just too much for them to take. And this is not an excuse for the bad apples. It's not an excuse for the ones that do just haul off and shoot somebody in the head. They should be prosecuted. If I did it, I should be prosecuted. The reason I make the comparison to the military, what's the military do? They send you to Afghanistan and say, hey, in that village, we have to take the village, and the Taliban is there, and go get them. Anybody, just looks at you the wrong way when they come out of the house and you think about a gun, you shoot them. Because it's war. Right? It's war. But for a police officer, oh wow. Even if they have a gun, if they're not pointing at you, well, you don't shoot them. And then, you have to watch every single step, and then, it's easier in the military. You go in and you have to conquer some place and you can get away with a lot more. That is, hey, these people are our enemies, so you just shoot them. But you can't do that in areas, no matter how bad the crime is. You have to always hold back and not do this and not do that. And I'm sure that's difficult for people. And sometimes cops make mistakes, and sometimes they might just go a little crazy. So yes, they should be held accountable. And this is why there's so much emotion. And at the same time, believe me, I understand people, say blacks in neighborhoods, that they're controlled so much more. Well, why is that? It's because the crime rate among blacks is so much higher. I think that's obvious. If there's a Japanese community, if 100,000 Japanese go to American Star community, I can tell you the crime rate's going to be so low. It's going to be much lower than in white areas. And of course, if you know that there's more crime in the white areas, well, they're going to watch out there more. But all of this connects the same thing. Why so much crime? It's also about emotion, isn't it? And what about the N-word and the F? It's about emotion. It's not reason that gets people into trouble. It's not reason that causes people to be violent. It is not reason that causes people to be intolerant and to attack others. It's emotion. And I know I'm presenting to you a somewhat emotional presentation of this. I'm doing it on purpose. I could try to talk like maybe a Mr. Spock and only talk on a level of reason. One problem with that is you go to sleep. Right? Who wants a college professor that's talking to you about even the most interesting thing you can imagine, and he's talking in a voice like this? And in December 1944, at a point when the Allies thought that they had already basically beat Nazi Germany, then the Battle of the Bulge began. Who wants to listen to a professor like that? You're going to go to sleep. So yes, I inject emotion into what I say, and I feel emotion as well. And I feel emotion mainly because a sense of empathy, first of all. Also a sense of desperation. I see people are so unreasonable. I don't care what race you are, they're unreasonable people. Even most people are good, but even most good people, in a way, they just don't get it. What we need is more reason, more ethics. Ethics is one of the 5 branches of classical philosophy. It is important. Philosophy is not some kind of subject, we have to pass this just to get our diploma or whatever. No, it's really, really important. And even if you're religious, you rely on your religion, perfect, but you shouldn't put philosophy aside. because sometimes it's a lack of philosophy that's led to all the excesses of religions. And every religion has its excesses. Remember, burning people at the stake just because they thought that, Jesus Christ, well, he's the Son of God, but he was created after God the Father, because God, and they would burn you at the stake for saying that. Catholics would burn you at the stake. Or you were an old lady that might be somewhat of an outsider, and you use herbs to kill people, so you must have been a witch. And mainly it was Protestants burning you at the stake for that. I mean, look into religious history, right? I mean, there's skeletons in all of those closets. And in the closets of philosophers, there are skeletons as well, except maybe for those who always preach tolerance and reason and understanding and basing your ethics on sound reasoning and on what is good, and what is good for the individual as well as what is good for society. And I see that these values have been so degraded, and by some are being purposely further degraded by the forces of, yes, communism / Nazism / totalitarianism. I'm going to give another talk on this, the left and the right, as I may have mentioned here. Don't miss it. Don't miss it, because I'm going to put forth some ideas, things that you most likely have never thought of in your life. I know a lot of things I've said today, I'm sure you have thought of, or you've read someplace or another. But on my channel, you will encounter more than a few ideas that you have not entertained in your life. And I'm not saying I'm always right. If you think that I'm wrong in something, write to me. Tell me. I don't care. I will welcome it. Because there are two possibilities. Either you were right, and being a man of reason, I'll think it through, think, wow, this person's right, I will thank you for it, and say, well, I'm going to modify my opinion there, or include your opinion in mine, whatever, depending on the circumstances. And if I think you're not right, I'll explain why. But it should be about this, talking to people, reasoning with people, together trying to find solutions, and not dividing up all society, because these are the techniques that the Nazis used, these are techniques that the communists use, and these are techniques that the totalitarians have always used. You divide society to weaken that society, and then you take it over. And then then it's the total censorship. We're going in that direction now. Warning. Remember Lost in Space from the 1960s? You older folks. Warning, Will Robinson, that robot frantically shaking his arm. Warning. Well, we're at that stage now. All the signs are that we're heading towards totalitarianism, and so many fools have not even seen it. I say again, read about 1930s Germany, read about the beginning of the Soviet Union, how that came about. Read about the beginnings of totalitarianism anywhere, and you will see all the same signs. It's division. This race against that race, this ethnicity against that ethnicity, this religion against that religion. It's always the same. And those who want to take over power and take it over completely always divide the society to weaken it. Then they take over. When they have the power, the ones that supported them, if they dare give a peep of dissent and say, well, wait a minute, yes, President Biden, we were following you, and we like leftism, and we hate these Trumpers, but now you're doing this, we don't agree with that. If it goes total totalitarianism, then they'll start killing their own people. Then they start suppressing their own people. It happened in Nazi Germany. It happened in the Soviet Union. It happened in China. It happened in the French Revolution. It happened all over where the forces of totalitarianism have taken power. And it practically always started the same way. You divide. French Revolution, what was it there? The evil aristocrats, and yeah, they were spending money and they were suppressing, but yeah, I'm not saying they're all good. It was the evil aristocrats against the people. Well, really, it wasn't the poor people that organized the French Revolution. It was the middle class. There were lawyers like Robespierre that felt bad because they couldn't get into the upper echelon because they weren't noble. In BLM, it's not the poor blacks that live in the neighborhood where I lived, because I lived in this poor neighborhood too. It's not those good, decent people, no. It's these three trained Marxists. These people went to university. It's people of the middle class that don't think they have enough power and are trying to take the power then by saying, yes, you poor people, you should rise up. They're using the poor masses for their purposes, as Hitler did, as Stalin did, as Mao Zedong did, as they did in the French Revolution, as they've done again and again and again. It's always the same thing, and so many fools today don't see we're going in that direction. Please, people, wake up. And I'm not saying this because I like some people. I'm not saying this. I'm saying because otherwise we're going to end up in the same way. It's going to be totalitarianism, but now the danger is even greater. Personally, I think we're at a tipping point. The danger is greater than ever before. Think 9/11. You think that was bad, but there was thousands of dead? That sure was bad. But at least that united the country to a large degree. What we see now is totally divided the country. And, need I quote Abraham Lincoln, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And that's where we are now. We're at the point that this cannot go on. This will not go on, let me tell you. A year from now, I'm convinced of it. Could I be wrong? Yes, of course I can be wrong. Only a fanatic says, I'm sure 100%. Only a fanatic. Unless it's mathematics. But this is not mathematics. The human being is much more complex. Any attempt to reduce a human being to a mathematical formula is doomed to failure from the beginning. And of that, I'm 99.99999% sure. But never say 100%. Because then you're a fanatic. That's going to be another talk. So as you see, if you haven't heard enough of me yet, and I'm sure some of you might think, oh, what's this guy talking about? I don't want to hear that. Well, if you don't want to hear it, you don't have to. Nobody's forcing you. If you think anything I said makes no sense whatsoever, let me know. I'd be curious. If you are more a Mr. Spock type and you want to tell me, David, you get a bit too emotional there. Maybe you should just speak more calmly. And don't say to humanity, oh, you're so dumb or stuff like that. Because I debated, before I started this series of podcasts, I debated with myself for a year. Should I present these things totally, not only in the light of reason, that's always my thing, but also with a voice of reason that's always moderate. I really respect the people that no matter what happens, they can have a calm and a moderate voice. Yes, look at this. It seems that the Nazis have taken over the radio stations and the newspapers. This is not so good because the Nazis are obviously extremists. And if they've taken over the radio stations and the newspapers and they have total control over the press, that means that they're going to really take over everything. And people, we should really be worried about that. That's how maybe a calm, collected person would have spoken in 1935. I wouldn't have spoken like that. No, I would have spoken much more emotion just to wake people up. I think there's a time when people have to be woken up. Not woke, but woken up. Some talk about the Great Awakening. Well, I hope it's as close as some people think. But don't expect Jesus Christ to come down on a cloud and save us all, because I predict that's not going to happen. And if it does, I'd be convinced it's certain forces projecting a hologram of Jesus Christ onto a cloud just to convince people, just to sway us, because our beliefs have been so manipulated for so long. This is what's done in every society. I'll get into that in a talk too. And there's a reason for that, and that's not necessarily always bad. But the truth is, the people's opinions are swayed so easily by people who know how to do that. And as someone who, I learned hypnosis when I was in my early 20s. And as far as the way the human mind works, I'll be a bit modest here in just saying that I know much more than the average person about how the human mind works, about how to sway people. But let me assure you, I'm not in these podcasts trying to sway you to definitely accept everything I say. I'm giving my opinions. I'm giving reasoning behind my opinions. If you don't accept it, fine. That's fine. I don't want to be considered any kind of a guru, any kind of political... I don't want to get into that. What I seek in my own life is truth. I'm looking for a truth, even if the truth isn't pleasant for me. That's what I'm seeking. And I want others to do the same using certain mental tools. And I'll get into that more deeply too in the future. Mental tools on how to think more clearly. But this doesn't mean you have to exclude emotions. Let's face it. We are not some sort of Spockian aliens that don't have any real emotions unless we're sick. Emotions can lead us down some really bad and dangerous paths, and that path is much more dangerous than the path of reason, believe me. So yes, we should control our emotions to a point. However, we should also express ourselves emotionally. But to get back to the main topic here, which I always like to do when I go off on my stream of consciousness sorts of talks. I laugh at myself now. In our language, it starts with the language. The left knows this very well, the right knows this very well. This is why they try to censor a lot of speech. If you can get people to talk like you do, to use the terms you do, to introduce a term like political correctness and get everybody to believe it, yes, we must be politically correct, we must be politically correct. That's one step towards dominating their minds. I know that very well. As someone who learned hypnosis, I know that very well. All these things they tell us, you can say, don't say all lives matter, you must say BLM, Black Lives Matter. And then they say, oh yes, I'm sorry I said that. That doesn't seem like such a big thing, but it is, because then they go further and further until in the end we're just parrots repeating what they want us to say. And worse yet, if you repeat anything to yourself enough, you yourself get to learn to believe it. You are convinced of it. I'll get into that more deeply. This will shock you and wake you up as well. You'll get to understand some things you haven't understood till now. This is what we do to ourselves constantly. Forget the political influences, political groups, whatever. We do this to ourselves as well. In other words, on my podcast, on my different episodes, you're going to hear things explained multi-layered. I'm going to approach every topic in a multi-layered fashion. Because reality is multi-layered. It's not simplistic. It's not this or that. It's not black or white. It's not, no. There are thousands of nuances, and only when we can learn to see things from the individual perspective, most personally from your perspective, you as an individual, from the small group perspective, my family, my neighborhood, or me and my friends, for example, from the societal perspective, I as an individual embedded within an entire society. From a futuristic perspective, in what direction is humanity going? From a subconscious perspective, what forces are there in our subconscious minds that are pushing us one way or another? From a spiritual perspective as well, only when you can learn to jump from one perspective to another, sometimes making apparent quantum leaps, to go from here, to go from the tree to the group of trees, to the entire forest, to above the forest, to above the earth. When you go from one to the other and come up with reasonable explanation for things that coincide, one level coincides the other to the other, only then, I believe, can you be fairly certain that you're on the right path and that you're understanding the totality of what's going on. I'm going to help you down that path, because this is basically not my path. I'm on that path, but it's not my path. It is what I call the path of Socrates. And if you've had the patience and the forbearance to listen to me for now almost 1 hour, 9 minutes, then I like to believe at least that you too are on this, the path of Socrates. By now, have a fine day wherever you are, or a fine night, and you'll hear me the next time. Bye.